The College of Business at Creighton University, in association with Cox Business, presents Leadership Conversations, a forum with James M. Kilts. Mr. Kilts is known around the world as a business leader and recognized for reviving brands and turning around established companies like Nabisco and Gillette. The event was taped at the Hickson Lead Auditorium on the Creighton campus.
Welcome to Leadership Conversations. We often say that leaders are in the conversation business, that leaders have the job all the time to be active and present in all of the places where they have to listen and learn. And conversations have to occur in business with clients and with customers, with colleagues, and certainly with oneself. We're very privileged today in Leadership Conversations to have James M. Kilts as our guest. Mr. Kilts brings a very distinguished background as one of the leading CEOs of major global marketing companies. He was head of crafts and then ran Nabisco, General Foods, finally Gillette, and one of the great turnarounds of all time, where a fellow that we all know named Warren Buffett made the comment that Jim Kilts transformed Gillette. I've learned so much from Jim, he said, as we will today. And so with that, I welcome you, Jim Kilts, to Creighton and to Leadership Conversations.
Well, thank you, Roger. It's great to be here. It's great to be here in the Harper Center. I feel like I'm at home here because the University of Chicago has a Harper Center given by the same generous person, Mr. Mike Harper and his wife. And it's great to be here at this wonderful city and this wonderful campus.
Well, we're delighted that you're here. I know you've been very active at the University of Chicago, and we're an executive in residence there and have been teaching, so the time you spend here today teaching with us is probably a very comfortable space for you. Before we get into all of the things you have to teach us, and I've had the privilege of knowing you for a bit, so I know that you could do 3 hours on any of the topics we're going to talk about today. But we like to start these conversations by finding out something about you. We know you're famous. We know that you're a well-known CEO. You've written an exceptional book, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I'm always curious about the journey that got you here. What took place in your life that gave you the focus and the animating energy and the confidence to sort of step into your life and begin it as you did? And I want to start with a question about where were you born? Tell me about your family. Tell me something about you, the Jim Kilts that isn't on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Well, I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, and I was blessed having two of the best parents that anyone ever could ask for. They gave me a lot of what I call traditional values. Mm-hmm. My dad was a postal worker who worked his way up to be a superintendent in the post office. My mother was an accounting clerk. And they got up early every day, worked hard, and came home and still had plenty of time for the family. And they instilled my value system in me, which was all about, I think they were, high integrity, hard work, and family support. And I had a sister, and I still have a sister, and we grew up together. And one of my fondest memories, I always tell people about where I grew up in the south side of Chicago, and how we used to take baths. And when I was growing up, until I was about 8 years old, we didn't have hot water. So what we did when we took a bath was we boiled water on the stove, you put it in along with the cold water, and you heated it up. We used to kid, we'd get about this much water in the bathtub, and my sister, my little sister, and I would sit there never thinking anything of it, not being bashful or ever. Yeah. I was, not even, 5, 6 years old when we did it, but we'd sit in that bathtub and think how great it was to have a bath on Saturday night.
Safe to say you've come a long way, Jim. When you were a kid, who were your heroes? Who did you admire and try to emulate?
Well, I can't remember anybody in particular that I was a hero other than Ernie Banks. Yeah. Now, Ernie, you'd come home from school every day, and the Cubs always played in the afternoon. And I'd come and watch Ernie Banks, and I can remember the year he hit 4 grand slams, and I saw him. And I think it was I was a avid athlete when I was a kid. And I just love watching the Chicago Cubs play baseball. And I was so disappointed that they disappointed me this year. Now, I'll tell you a story about that, too. My son called me up, and said, "Dad, I can't believe it." He's about 20. I've been waiting 28 years for. I've been waiting 28 years. And I said, "Son, you've got a lot longer to wait. I've been waiting 60 years. It still hasn't happened."
Those who are Nebraska football fans know something about long-distance vision, I can tell you. So you had wonderful memories of childhood, which you clearly shaped in terms of your own vision of the horizon for your life. What about pals? Did you have lots of pals as a kid? Were you a big builder of friendship?
Yeah, I would say that we played on teams. I mean, we were always out in the street or on the park. We had a park about two blocks from our house, and then when I got a little older, we moved to a house right across from the park. So I played touch football,
Sure.
tackle football, baseball. I loved to play baseball, and you know, it just carried with me. And I was on the golf team in high school, and I was on the wrestling team and the football. You know, everything. I love to. I think, you know, those kind of team sports are great, and individual sports are great. So I'm not someone who says, you know, I just need to be on a team. I like every kind of sport, every kind of activity where you can learn and challenge yourself.
Well, rumor has it that you're a pretty good golfer. So obviously those skills have carried on. And it's important to understand, though, what I call the animating energy. What was it that under you early on kind of sparked and inspired you? Because you had a long process. I mean, you went to Knox College, which is in Illinois, right? Yep. And then you went to the University of Chicago and you got an MBA. And believe me, University of Chicago is very happy you went to the University of Chicago because you came back later and have been very generous with them in your time and your help. And we all know what an exceptional school that is. But also it seems to me, as I listen to stories about your life, you identified people early on who you could learn from. You can call them mentors or teachers, but you seem to have a pattern in your life of attracting those people. Who were those people in your life? Were it teachers or coaches, or who touched you early on in your life that maybe in relationships that you had and you carried on for many years?
Well, I think it's a combination of all those things.
Yeah.
I had a coach who gave me a lot of opportunities. When he was my coach, he gave me the opportunity to be a driver school instructor and work in the gym and make some extra money. And he always taught me to. He was a kind of an emotional guy, and he'd blow his stack a lot, and then he'd regret blowing his stack. So I said, geez, you know, that was a lesson to learn. Try not to blow your stack so much, and maybe you'd get a little more accomplished. But he was a great mentor to me. And my history teacher that got me interested in high school was someone who was just dedicated, loved history, and taught me. I was an undergraduate major in history, so I loved that. And I carried those kind of relationships along in my life. And when I started business, one of my early bosses really taught me a lot. And he was another very tough guy. He had a reputation for being very tough, but he was very fair, too. So, in fact, I asked him, once, how come he was so tough? He says, well, you think I'm tough, but don't you think I'm fair? And it kind of struck me as the way of thinking about it. And then I would say that, I've carried a lot of relationships. Warren Buffett, I would say, is a mentor to me, even though I've known him only for about less than 10 years now.
He was a member of your board at Gillette.
Yeah, he was a member of my board and a great supporter and someone. And in reality, one reason I took the job at Gillette was because I would have the chance to work with someone like Warren Buffett, and that really excited me. So I've always appreciated the people who have taught me a lot.
Well, speaking of teaching a lot, there's a lot I want you to teach us today. You have been teaching in a lot of places, but you've certainly been teaching people that have worked for you, thousands of them across these companies. And one of the topics that you shared in this wonderful book called Doing What Matters, which incidentally has one of the great subtitles of all time, the great subtitle called Doing What Matters, and the subtitle is The Revolutionary Old School Approach to Business Success and Why It Works. And one of the things about you that's wonderful is that you're not afraid to break down the blocking and tackling in very clear, consistent, and I would say compelling ways. And one of the things that is in this book, and I've heard you talk about, is this thing called the Circle of Doom, which might be a description of today's market, but we'll come back to that later. What is the circle of doom, and what does it mean for us? What can we learn from that idea? Because I think it's more than an idea, isn't it?
Yeah, well, let me just take a step back. When I was recruited into Gillette, I had a period of time before I got there that I could study the company a little bit. And I came up with this idea that we had entered what I call the circle of doom. And I shared that with analysts shortly after I got there. And what had happened at Gillette was we had missed 14 straight earnings estimates.
Oops.
So 14 times in a row, 14 quarters in a row. And this is hard to believe because Henry Kravis and Warren Buffett were on our board at the time. So it's hard to believe that 14 straight quarters, we told Wall Street we would make X, and we made X minus Y. And so that was, part of the diagnostic. Our market shares were declining. Our sales and profits had been flat for the 5 years before I got there. We were starving the business of advertising. Advertising was declining precipitously. And at the same time, our overheads were growing. So I figured this was some pretty bad news to tell Wall Street. So as a good marketer, I created the concept of the circle of doom. And I think I have a slide that shows the circle of doom.
Well, we do.
Put that up good. And fundamentally describe that is, and the circle of doom I've seen operate in many different ways in different situations. But at Gillette, it was all about setting unrealistic expectations. I think because we disappointed so long, we wanted to tell people we do very well. And the first thing we did after we set those unrealistic expectations was to overinvest in capital and overhead to chase those unrealistic targets. And then inevitably, what we did was we pop
the slide up again.
That's all right. What inevitably we do is you wind up increasing prices to try to make those short-term numbers, and then there's going to be sales shortfalls from that. So you've got sales shortfalls, and then what you wind up is cutting the short-term advertising to try to make that number. And then what we did was we developed a PhD in what I call trade loading. And what that was all about was transferring our inventory into the trade via promotion. So what we had is a load of inventory in our warehouse, and we said to make our numbers, what we need to do is transfer that to the trade. So we had a sale all the time. We were having a sale at the end of the quarter. And indeed, we shipped 50% of our annual volume in a 4-week period, 50. 50% in a 4-week period. It happened to be the last week of each quarter.
That should have been a warning sign to somebody, I would think.
Well, it was a warning sign, and when I told Wall Street that we had done that, the stock immediately went down 25%. But you've got to expect that when you have a problem, you've got to be honest about it and expect that the shareholder is going to vote with their feet sometimes. But that's the only way you can start to fix it.
I love the story that before you entered Gillette, you got a bunch of smart people that you knew and trusted that helped you do a lot of homework on that company. So when you showed up for that first meeting, I think it was your management group, you knew more than they thought that they thought you knew. And it wasn't a way of sort of keeping them off balance. It was a way of keeping them honest, I guess.
Yeah, well, what I believe very strongly is in business, there's really 3 activities. You come in and you work on growth and innovation.
Right.
You work on cost and productivity. And you work on developing your organization. And I've been very successful applying 4 principles to those 3 activities. First principle is what I call intellectual integrity. And intellectual integrity is all about having an organization being able to hold up a mirror to itself and see the situation as it really is.
Right.
And that first day I walked into Gillette, I had my 13 direct reports come in, and I said I had a little presentation I was going to give the board on Wednesday, and I wanted to expose it to them because it was an outside perspective. And one of the things I pointed out in the presentation was that it looked like our overheads were high and our whole cost structure was high. And I asked my direct reports, I said, do you agree, does anybody in the room agree that our costs are too high? And 13 hands went up. And I said, well, this is going to be wonderful. This is what intellectual integrity is all about.
Yeah.
Everybody's on the same page right off the bat.
Right.
And what was so interesting is I asked the second question. I said, how many of you individually think the cost in your group, in your area, are too high? You know how many hands went up? None. And I would say that was the first step in getting what I call intellectual integrity. And it was the first step. The first day I was on the job, that was the first step in the beginning of the turnaround of Gillette. I have another little principle that I call enthusiasm. And that is all about convincing people that things can change and that they have the tools they need to make the change. And enthusiasm, everybody likes that fire in the belly enthusiasm when you're in business. And you like to work with enthusiastic people.
Sure.
But as I think of the enthusiasm we were able to create at Gillette, it was really about getting the organization to believe in change. And in one case, I'll give you an example, and it's usually an area that's very difficult to get an organization to change, and that was two acronyms we came up with, ZOG and NOG.
ZOG and NOG.
ZOG is zero overhead growth, and NOG was negative overhead growth. And usually when you think of transforming an organization and taking overhead out, you think of people walking around with their heads down and kind of disappointed and wondering what shoe's going to fall next. But we really made it a badge of honor at Gillette, based on the fact that we communicated very clearly that what we needed to do was take out the unnecessary cost in the company so we can afford to invest back in advertising and in promotional activities. So, and in R&D and development and building new products. So some of my best days, I can remember I used to run Oscar Mayer, and I'd have my Oscar Mayer hot dog at lunch every day. And
did you really have an Oscar Mayer hot dog?
Yeah, actually, we didn't have hot dogs when I got to Gillette, and I made him buy Oscar Mayer hot dogs so I could have.
Well, you used to run
that business. And they became a big seller, so I was a good marketer. But I had Oscar Mayer hot dog, and I remember some of the most reinforcing days were when young people, 26, 28, very new employees, used to come up to me in the cafeteria and say, Jim, you can't believe how we're zogging and nogging. Because they understood that eliminating those unnecessary costs gave them more responsibility, more accountability, and every quarter I reported back to the organization on how we were deploying those cost savings to build a business.
The phrase you used earlier is so powerful, this notion of enthusiasm, because it releases, when it's authentic, it releases a lot of energy in the organization. What was your role as CEO at creating that enthusiasm? Was it your job to pump up the place every day? Were you Mr. Cheerleader? Where did enthusiasm, I guess what I'm saying, what was the root of enthusiasm, and what did you do to encourage that?
I think it was really all about convincing people that change was wanted and that you would provide them the tools to make that change. Because that really creates enthusiasm. And what builds enthusiasm is seeing the results of that change in the marketplace. And seeing you go from a company that was delivering 0% overhead, 0% sales growth and 0% earnings growth to a company that compounded over the next 5 years, delivered 9% top line growth, all organic, and delivered earnings growth at 21%. So that builds on itself, and that's what's so exciting about it.
Well, and when they were zogging and nogging, or zigging and zagging, you also, it sounds like you made the process transparent, and you increased the level of accountability, which releases a kind of energy when they're doing it right. Isn't that the way it works?
Yeah, no, what you find is we measured morale with an outside service that has a huge database. And they predicted that in a difficult situation like that, when you had to take so much overhead out and that you were in the middle of a turnaround, the best they ever saw the morale of the company improve was at a 15 percentage point level. In 1 year, we improved the morale by 35% because we were so clear in the messaging and making the changes very quickly. And I guess that leads me to the next key principle that I've got is what I call action. And action is something that I was talking to some students earlier, and I said, whenever you're in an interview, people will tell you, tell me about yourself. And inevitably, it's, I'm action-oriented. And I said, my experience in companies is action is one of the most difficult things that you can possibly get in a company. And a very funny story I and I told the students this story, we had 24,000 different stock keeping units or product varieties in our company.
24,000?
24,000. We had sales of about $9 billion. We were a global company, but 24,000 different varieties of, batteries and razor blades is a little excessive. And so what I was doing when I first, about three months into the job, we were in an off-site meeting, and I had about 25 my key managers in that off-site meeting. And I said, what are we going to do about this SKU problem, this product variety problem? And one of the guys raised his hand from the back, and he said, Jim, you don't have to worry about this. We've got a cross-functional team that's working on it, composed of many people in this room. We have an outside consultant, and we think we're making great progress. We've been in session for over a year now. I said, well, that's terrific. I'm new CEO, got a lot of problems. Boy, this is great that this is under control. So I asked the next question. I said, how many of these SKUs have we taken out in the last year with all this help? And I thought, and I told the students, I said, I thought I had lost my voice, so I had to take a drink and say, how many have we taken out? And the little voice came, and he was sitting way in the back. He says, well, we have taken out a few, but we've actually added more back than we've taken out. I usually don't get too excited, but I got a little excited, a little agitated. And what I said was, well, why don't you bring me the computer printout, and we're ending at 3 o'clock today. Bring me that computer printout of the 24,000 different items with their last 52-week sales, and bring me a red magic marker. Oops. And we'll get started this afternoon. And what was so funny was they convinced me I didn't have to do it. But very shortly thereafter, I think by 5 o'clock that night, the entire company was telling the story.
How bad?
And shortly after that, we were down to 7,000 SKUs.
Good heavens.
And we took our working capital from 22% of sales to 0. So it just shows you that you can get action. You have to demonstrate that you want it. And again, you have to create the enthusiasm around believing that you really want it, and you have the tools to get it.
But the difference there in the story to me is there's a difference between activity and action. Your conversation was really focused on transparency, accountability, but also truth-telling. Gets back to your earlier comment about intellectual integrity. Because what you did in the room was you said, I want to know the truth, and I have a magic marker, and I'm going to find out myself. And that degree of accountability and candor, it seems to me, is like opening the windows in a room, because people want to work in that kind of environment. And it's also a great example of leadership. But I know you have a fourth principle. What is that?
Well, let me just tell you a little bit more about my action principle, because I have a slide, and they promised me I could show the slide. And it's a quote from Ross Perot.
Oh, yes.
And Ross Perot ran for president. He was the founder of EDS. He was on the board of General Motors.
Right.
And if you put the slide up, so
there it is.
It says, where I come from, if you see a snake, you kill it. Here you appoint a committee on snakes that goes out and hires a consultant on snakes. So one of the principles I developed is, along with that action, is find those snake killers. Go to the next slide, please. Make sure that you find those snake killers in your organization.
There they are. And
promote them, let them do their job, and that little voice in the back of the room that was the person who was telling me about the SKUs, and he was managing the task force that hadn't done a lot. In the next 4 years, he rose to be head of all operations and technology and manufacturing, saved us hundreds of millions of dollars, and was probably the key person in helping me to turn around the company.
I know there's a terrible pun about snakes having to do with additive, but we'll just let that go. The last principle you had that you've shared with me, and I really do listen to this, was this notion of customer understanding. What did you mean by that?
Well, in consumer products companies, what you really need to understand is what the consumer wants, what the consumer needs. You can manage your organization, you can cut costs, you can manage more efficiently, you can motivate your troops. But really what it's all about is satisfying your customers and consumers, understanding their underlying needs and wants, and translating that into communication and connection. And one of the things we felt best about at Gillette when I joined it, we were growing our market shares in only 30% of our sales. And 4 years later, we were growing our market shares in 90% of our sales. So that's very satisfying for the organization, and it really helps you to understand what's important, and that is customers and consumers.
I just have one more question about that, because it's so important. Everybody talks about understanding the customer. It's kind of the mantra that you read about. But it seems to me that that's, back to the title of our series, that's a series of persistent conversations with that customer. How did you, and with the customer base you've had in these companies, it's a global marketplace. What were some of the things you did? Because you had a reputation for fixing troubled brands and businesses. How did you reorient your companies? How did you really do that to get them to really, first of all, address a customer, and then how did you help them learn to listen to that customer in a sort of 24/7 way?
Well, I think it's a matter of getting out and talking to your customers, making your organization talk to customers. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite is just talking to our internal customers.
Yeah.
And this was the sales force. This was the first week I got to the job too. And I had my initial staff meeting on Monday, my board meeting on Wednesday, and then right after the board meeting, I went out and talked to some of our salespeople. Yeah. And I asked one of the salespeople, I said, young, smart, young guy, and I asked him, I said, well, why are you doing this trade loading? And he looked at me, and I had been there a week, not even a week. He looked at me, pointed his finger at me, and he said, it's you up in Boston that make us do it. We don't want to do it. And I realized right away that, the organization knew the problem, and they wanted to solve the problem, and they really had lacked confidence in the management because they felt like they were being projected to do the wrong thing. So what you always want to do is instill in your organizations the need to listen to consumers and customers and figure out what they want, because ultimately that's how you create a great company and build great brands.
Well, and doing it isn't a one-time thing. You do it constantly, don't you? I mean, isn't it a constant?
It's constant, and that's what the brand building is all about. And my best days as a brand builder, I can remember some of the things that we were able to do, whether it was we developed Country Time Lemonade, Crystal Light,
I want to know more about
Lunchables.
That. I want to know more about that, because you have a reputation also as a great brand builder, and I know there have been brands that you have sort of given life to. And tell us about some of those, because those are great stories.
Well, we can start off, and one of the brands that we were able to turn around when I was at Nabisco, and I joined Nabisco, and it was in a circle of doom too. It was a little different than Gillette's circle of doom, and I hadn't figured out what to call it yet. But it was a company that had kind of given up on growth, and we had a brand called Planters. And it was really a great brand, but at the time...
Planters Peanuts.
Planters Peanuts.
Yeah.
And Planters Nuts, and more broadly, and snacks.
Yeah. And
it was a great brand, and we were kind of apologizing for the brand. It was kind of high in fat, it had salt, it had some calories in it, and we were kind of, woe is me, nobody's going to eat this stuff anymore. And I said, well, really you've got to think about it in the context of what you're competing with. It actually is a pretty healthy snack. And the fat in nuts is better for you than the fat in other things. And by the way, it's a lot of fun. And so what we did was reintroduced a character that we had abandoned, and that character was Mr. Peanut.
Sure.
And I think we have a commercial that I can show you.
Let's look.
Let's take a look at the commercial.
Brings back memories for some.
Quit hogging the cashews.
I'm not.
R2.
I'm not.
R2.
I'm not.
Animal. It's a cat.
It's a beaver.
It's a brown cat.
It's a beaver.
I think it's a marmot.
That was a beaver.
A beaver's nice.
Yes.
Look at him. There he is. Oh, yeah. He looked at me. I'm going to give him
He's
a nut.
cute, isn't he? No. Beavers don't like nuts. I've never seen a beaver eat a nut.
I've never seen a beaver.
Everyone loves Planters nuts. Fresh roasted taste, and they're cholesterol-free.
Oh, he's good.
He's very good.
Planters, relax, go nuts.
Think that'll fit in the van?
Oh, that's wonderful.
I can show that commercial. I get excited about it all the time because it helped us really double the size of the business and really turn it around and restored our self-confidence about what that business was all about. And you went from apologizing for a wonderful product to really being proud of it.
Think how proud it must have been to work as the brand people on that and see that come alive. That's terrific.
You're proud of brand people, the manufacturing, the accounting people, the IT people. Everybody is proud when you win in the marketplace because you better understand consumers and connect with them.
That's terrific. Show us another one.
Well, I have another one.
Tell us
a little
more
story
stories.
about Country Time Lemonade. I happened to be the brand manager on Country Time when we introduced it. And Country Time Lemonade really came out of an idea. We had a product called Kool-Aid, still a fairly big product, but back then it was really big.
Yeah.
And what we found through some research was that 60% of the consumption, the consumer intake of Kool-Aid was not by kids, but by adults.
Really?
40% was by kids, 60% was by adults, because you'd make up the pitcher, put it in your refrigerator, and then adults would drink it. So we got the idea that we could be more attractive to all family members.
Sure.
By developing an adult flavor, which happened to be lemonade, which was the most adult flavor in the line, and positioning it very specifically to adults. So I was the brand manager, and you go through a process called concept testing, where you get a test score back, and it kind of tells you how much you're going to sell and how successful you're going to be. So I'll never forget when I got that concept score back, a young brand manager, 3.5 years out of business school, hot shot, and I just knew this was going to be a home run.
Yeah.
So I got the test results back, and it was a 6, and the norm was a 20. So this was one of the lowest scores ever received.
Career goes up in flames.
And I thought, oh, my career is over.
Can't buy the
I'm
house
dead.
now.
And you have to go in front of this board of presidents and key managers and pitch why you want to introduce this product. So I figured out that one of the key things was that during this period of time was the time of gas lines and very recessionary. And this was a $2 product. And we'd never had a $2 product like that really in the company before that we had a database on. We were used to testing products like Jell-O, which was at the time a dime, shake and bake, about 50 cents. The good seasoned salad dressings, about 39 cents. So I rationalized myself into convincing everyone that because of the recession and the database, this was still a good idea.
Right.
And I said, but just wait, because we're going to get the advertising test back, and it's going to show you how great it is. So then we got the advertising back, and it was kind of lackluster. So there was a lot of competitive pressure. We decided to go ahead anyway, figuring it would probably be a failure and I would take the fall for it, of course. But what happened was, and I'll show you the advertising, that we created one of the advertising classics.
Really?
And we created the most successful new product introduced in the food industry in the 1970s. Let's take a look at the advertising. I'll tell you a little more about it.
Sure is hot, Grandpa.
Yeah, a real scorcher. You know what'd be good about now? Some good old-fashioned lemonade like your grandma's. Time was, the yard was full of people drinking your grandma's lemonade. Nothing like it on a hot summer day. The truth is, nowadays folks can't hardly make lemonade like your grandma.
Bet I can, Grandpa.
Not too tart?
Nope.
Not too sweet?
Nope. You'll see.
Introducing New Country Time. It tastes like good old-fashioned lemonade. Country Time is made with natural lemon flavor. Just add water. Sugar's already in. New Country Time. Tastes like good old-fashioned lemonade.
Here, Grandpa.
Well, I'll be. Did Grandma make this?
No, I did.
Oh, Emma, you've got competition.
Country Time, Country Time. Tastes like that good old-fashioned lemonade.
New Country Time lemonade flavored drink mix.
Now that campaign was called the Grandfather Campaign. It was done by Ogilvy and Mather, and they used to show it to everybody and got all kinds of new business.
Sure.
But I can remember when I was the product manager, we asked for a pull out of that campaign. And I'm the product manager, and all the top agency executives came in, and they were in the room and presented the pull outs, and I thought they were pretty good, but none of them had a grandfather in it. And I can still remember, and I told the students this earlier, that my boss sitting there smoking his pipe, he could smoke then, and he's puffing his pipe, and he says,
This is the 70s.
yeah, this is the 70s, and he says, that's pretty good advertising, but why don't you put a grandfather in it all, and we'll call it the Grandfather Campaign. And that was when the Grandfather Campaign was actually born, recognizing neither me nor the agency knew it was the Grandfather Campaign. And the lesson learned I have out of that, and I told the students this today, is make sure you get a smart boss, because it helps a lot.
That's fun. Tell us another one, because I love you to. Part of what makes you unique in the roles you've had, because you've been running these big businesses, is you haven't lost your passion for marketing. You are, at your core, someone who takes an idea and blows it out there. And each of these things you're talking about, while it's a commercial, really is about the ideation and development of an idea. And, you know, we often say that leaders are in the idea business. It comes back to that enthusiasm again. And it's fun to watch you talk about these commercials and to sense the very sense they come of the creativity they come from. That's fun. It's fun to see that.
Well, it's funny because my mom always asked me and my dad, well, what do you do?
What do you really do?
What do you do? You know, do you work with the accountants? Do you
Right.
work? And I say, no, I build brands and work with the organizations that love to build brands.
Yeah.
But the next one is Lunchables. And when I was president of Oscar Mayer, I went to Oscar Mayer, and we weren't making too much money at the time. And we needed to develop a new product line, a value-added product line with some new consumer benefits. So I called a friend of mine who I'd worked with a long time. He was in the marketing consulting business. And I said, come in. I got some great development people in the company, some great marketers. Let's work on developing a new brand under Oscar Mayer.
Yeah.
So we came up with Lunchables. Let me show you the advertising and see if you can get the two words that really made the business. And a little bit step back on there. When I first introduced Lunchables, I was still at the company for about 6 months after we introduced it, and it immediately went to about $300 million of sales. Then I left the company to go, we got bought out by Philip Morris, and I'll tell you a little story about that later. I got bought out by Philip Morris 3 times. But I left.
They were following you, I think.
Yeah, I left to go to Kraft. And then I came back because Philip Morris bought Kraft, too.
Yeah.
And I wound up running Oscar Mayer. And when I came back, my boss told me, he said, you got to get rid of this Lunchables because it was selling $300 million. It's gone down to nothing now. It's gone way down. And it's just not doing well.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, well, you've got to be kidding. This is one of my children. This is like my baby. You got to give me a chance to fix it. So one of the things we did to fix it was we added a drink, we added dessert, we added nutritional value, but we also found these 2 words that I'll capture in this commercial that really captures the essence
see if we know what they
of
are.
consumer insight.
Good.
Let's run one commercial.
Fixing lunch is one of the joys of motherhood.
Peanut butter again?
It's a thankless job.
Ew, egg salad? Isn't this your doggy bag from last night?
You're always pressed for time.
Are you mad at me?
Thank goodness for Lunchables from Oscar Mayer. Their best meats, cheeses, crackers, even dessert. Best of all, kids love them.
Thanks, Mom.
Lunchables from Oscar Mayer. Lunch will never be the same.
I think I got it. It's Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
That's
That's what it was
huge.
all about, the understanding that the mom wanted appreciation. The kids are going to love the product. Mom wanted to be appreciated by giving them something they enjoy and something that was also good for them. So it was exciting. Next, a little example I brought with me is one that is quite interesting. When Gillette bought Duracell in 1997, about 3 years before I got to Gillette, about 3.5 years. And what we had was a marketing concept that we used on blades and razors for years. It was called the trade-up strategy, where you always created new benefits for consumers, you know, whether it's Track 2 to Sensor to Mach 3 to currently Fusion, where you invested in technology, made the product a lot better, consumers liked it a lot more and were willing to pay more for it. So we had a lot of sharp marketers from the blade and razor business.
Oh,
yes, it is.
That was
a lot of sharp marketers, and they were really brilliant marketers. And we put them in the Duracell business. And what happened, it was before I got there, but they applied that same trade-up model and created a premium line of batteries called Ultra. Put all the marketing investment against those, and it created a $500 million business. And when I got there, they said, boy, we've got this great, exciting, big, successful business. The only thing that we failed to see was that we had lost about $800 million of our traditional copper top business. So, and the real difference is, in blades and razors, you have a torture test every day. It's a sharp knife on your face. So you're really, you know, it's protected by 50 patents. So when you're shaving, you really recognize the benefit of paying that premium for that outstanding shave. In batteries, you ask consumers, Hey, do you even remember the last time you changed the batteries in your changer? Do you remember you got an extra 15 days on it?
Right.
And they really didn't. So let me show you the Ultra advertising because it's an example of some pretty exciting. You look at it and say, boy, that's wonderful advertising. Then I'll show you another example of how we really came up with a different consumer insight that really turned the business around. Let's see one commercial.
Introducing the most powerful Duracell Ultra ever. With the advanced performance of new M3 technology, it's the most powerful alkaline battery in the world.
So you looked at that and said, well, that's a lot of fun. That's pretty good. You know, it was something that had worked a long time in the category. It was my battery lasts longer than your battery. And it worked for years, but the consumer was basically, everybody was doing it and saying the same thing. So it actually turns out that one of our creative directors was down in Florida during a hurricane. And they were telling everybody, go buy batteries, you might lose your power. So he went to the local Home Depot and looked at the shelf and realized that the Duracell batteries were all sold out. Eveready was sold down some too. And what was left is regional brands and private label. And he says, there's a reason. In life-threatening situations, what you're doing is you're buying the Duracell because you can't afford to take any chances. And that led us to the creative development of this insight, which let's take a look at another commercial, and I think you'll understand how we went from my battery is better than yours to really an emotional hook with our consumers.
Inside that camera is something familiar, a battery. And while you might think all batteries are the same, consider what happened here last winter when a heart stopped and his life depended on a Zoll electronic defibrillator. And Zoll trusts only one brand of battery, Duracell. So whether it's saving a moment or saving a life, it just has to work. Duracell, trusted everywhere.
Wow. That really does grab you.
Yeah, we took the sales up about just short of $500 million in a 4-year period, and we doubled the profitability of the company against that advertising. And they're still running it today very successly, is my understanding. So.
Good heavens. Do you have one more for us?
Yes, I have one more, and it's one of my favorites. It's the story of what I call the Little Red Razor. And when I first joined Gillette, I was having a review with my blade and razor people, and I was also on the board of a department store and knew kind of the fashion trends and what colors were going to be hot. And we were reviewing a promotion that was done in Brazil, and we had also tried it in the U.S., and it was called Cool Blue Razor. And it had moved the business a little bit, and I said, geez, wouldn't it be kind of nifty if we did a red razor, kind of a sports car red, and built a marketing program around that. And I'll never forget this as long as I live, and I described it to students today again, as the president of the division and the marketing VP and the head of strategy looked at me and said, Jim, don't you understand? Red is the color of blood.
Blood, yes.
Blood, and there's all kinds of subliminally bad things that are going to happen if you have a red razor, because people will think of cutting themselves, and untold consumers will go to competition. So I went back in my office recognizing I was pretty naive and dumb, just starting out coming from the food business. And I sat down and thought about it for about 2 minutes, turned around, picked up the phone and said, well, at least put it in your next screens, because I'm not quite sure that makes sense to me. So we did that, and about 2 years later, our biggest competitor, Schick, was introducing a brand new razor to compete with our Mach 3, and it was called Quattro. And it had 4 blades, and they announced that they were going to spend $80 million of marketing.
Did you say 80 million?
$80 million of marketing to unseat Gillette as the leader in the blade and razor business. So our board was worried. Our shareholders were worried. The stock was under pressure. And I called my team together and said, oh, well, how are we going to defend against this major competitive threat? And lo and behold, the president of the division said, We've been doing a lot of work on that red razor. It looks like it's a good idea. We're going to put a whole marketing program around it. We're going to guarantee that this is the best shave in the world. And it became a great example of taking a little idea and trying to make it into a big idea. And in the book, I call it incremental innovation. But let's take a look, and I'll tell you the rest of the story.
Unsurpassed engineering, unparalleled technology. It blows away the competition. Champion, Mach 3 Turbo Champion. It's the world's best shave. Gillette guarantees it. Now with a red-hot new look, nothing else even comes close. Test drive one today. Mach 3 Turbo Champion from Gillette. The best a man can get.
Well, it turned out to be a huge success. It was the most successful line extension we had ever done as a company. But more importantly, one of the greatest compliments that was ever given to me was by the head of the executive committee of the competitor. And he saw me at a conference not too long after that when we had a 34 market share and they only got a 3. And he pointed right at me and he says, "You killed us with that little red razor."
$80 million. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Well, all of these stories, though, have sort of common elements of persistence, persistence with an idea, trusting your gut, your instincts, that sort of bias for action, let's try it, but also listening deeply to those customers, something you listen, and those themes really do find focus in those commercials. They're wonderful. Well, there's so much to talk about, but we do have some opportunity to hear from our audience. We would love to give the audience a chance to ask Mr. Kilts some questions, because this is, after all, an opportunity to do this, and you don't get somebody like this a few feet away that often. So perhaps we could find a person that would like to ask a question. I see someone standing in the back.
Yes, my name is Mike White. I'm a senior here at Creighton University, double majoring in accounting and finance. My question for Mr. Kilts is, it seems as though you've had a lot of experience with mergers and acquisitions, working for Kraft, General Foods, Nabisco, and Gillette. In your opinion, what are the keys to not only successfully merging a company, but merging cultures?
Ooh. I think that's a great question. I think it gets back to those 4 principles. I think you need intellectual integrity first. You need to decide what's best in each company and try to take the best of it. And that's what the intellectual integrity is all about. Then you have to convince people that that is the right thing to do and create enthusiasm around getting it done. And then you have to be laser focused in executing it and making sure that you take those best practices and get it through the organization. At the same time, you need to be very sensitive to the people and make sure that you over-communicate, because change is very difficult and people tend to hold on to the things that they've done and the way they've done them for a long time.
Another question.
Another student I saw earlier.
Yes. She came back. What's wrong?
I'm Jamie Wewell, and I work for Union Pacific in their marketing and sales department. You've talked today about a lot of successful branding campaigns, and in doing so, to make those successful, you had to manage a variety of teams. In your various executive management roles and making decisions on who was best suited to lead those teams, what kind of emphasis did you place on IQ versus EQ, or emotional intelligence, on each of those candidates? And furthermore, what is the importance and the value you place on high EQ in managing a diverse team?
Well, I think in business, it always helps to have some, what I call very basic, street smarts, good intelligence. You're never going to get too far if you keep going down the up elevator. You know, it just doesn't work. So you need that fundamental understanding and knowledge. But I would say that you also need to understand how to bring a team together and work together. Now, one of the problems with being a good team leader, and a lot of people face this problem early in their career, is they want to get consensus. They want to get everybody to agree. And a good team leader also needs the authority to be the decision maker. And a lot of times the consensus answer isn't always the right answer. And what you need to do is be able to tease out the best from everybody, and once you make a decision, get them behind the decision. Right. But not necessarily do it as a consensus.
We have one more question? Yeah, right there.
My name's Kim McCarthy. I'm a graduate student here at Creighton, and I'm wondering which personality traits you think differentiate a transformational leader from a CEO.
Oh. We give you easy ones here, don't we?
Yeah, I would say that the difference, I've never heard it quite asked like that. I think what you want to do is be a leader, okay? And to be a leader, many times you need to be a very good manager also. So there's a combination of getting people behind a vision or an idea of what you want to accomplish. At Gillette, our vision was to build total brand value. And it was all about building our brands and the value of our brands and connecting everybody in an organization to do that. On the other hand, you had to be a pretty good manager, otherwise you had chaos going after that. And that's why I write in my book about the processes and techniques I use to organize that chaos, if you will, against a specific vision, and that vision was building brand value. So the management is the techniques you use to bring your leadership to life, if you will.
Yes, in the back.
Hello, I'm Beverly Crocker. I teach business ethics here at Creighton University. Thank you for being with us today. I think you could sell coats to polar bears. And so with that in mind, I think, can't advertising and branding get us to buy things we don't necessarily need or want? So how do we guard against an inappropriate use of our skills and abilities? How do we guard against too much consumerism?
Yeah, no, I think that's a classic question. And you've got people I can remember when I was a young man, and you're always dealing with that. And I saw Andrew Kershaw, who was a very close associate of David Ogilvy, who was one of the advertising icons, talk about it. And I think you have a whole judgment system that you have to develop over time about what's right and what's wrong in the business. And I would say that what you have to remember is you want to communicate to consumers about the benefits of your product and introduce new benefits, improve benefits, and in a very focused way communicate those things. And I think there's been a lot of self-regulation in the advertising business that really does help you to deal with those very difficult and questionable situations. And in the book I say, one of the principles I ever had is if I went to church and the people sitting in the pews next to me started criticizing me about the advertising, I probably didn't do it very well.
Question in the back.
Hi, Mark Taylor, a professor of accounting here at Creighton University. I've, like many, have observed the corporate meltdowns that we've had over the last 20 or so years, with an emphasis on maybe the twin towers of Enron and WorldCom, governance failures all along the way, and a significant market intervention from the regulators with Sarbanes-Oxley. And yet we still see, 6 years later, tremendous crisis in confidence in the markets. Look what's happening over the last several weeks with the credit markets. I'd like you to speak to some of those issues and how we can avoid them in the future.
Well, you probably could do a seminar that would last till 11 o'clock at night on those issues. I would say, you would think Sarbanes-Oxley would have, geez, we invested a fortune in Sarbanes-Oxley. Here we got another issue. And I guess I've heard, some politicians say that it's the failure of capitalism and that was a failure of regulation. And other people, other politicians say, no, it was misregulation. And when you look at the current situation, it is very upsetting. And I have a little saying that I developed over the years. I think the road to hell is paved by well-intentioned politicians who have bad economic principles. And when you look at it, Congress and the executive branch, there's plenty of blame to go around the private sector too, but they encouraged what I call the ninja loans. No income, no job, and no assets. And with the fundamental assumption that real estate prices would continue to go up, they created a great market for real estate because we were offering these below market loans, which caused building to increase. However, what happened was real estate prices didn't continue to go up and caused a real crisis of confidence. So, I think, again, it gets to intellectual integrity. these sound bites, this blame game doesn't do much good for anyone, and it certainly doesn't do good for all the people who are getting hurt today, neighbors, my friends, my family, and other people's neighbors, friends, and family. And I think as leaders in the business community, it's up to us to talk about, let's figure out the problems, let's try to do it objectively, and let's move on with solutions that really work, and not either more, the circle of doom in this situation could be more government regulation that causes even more problems as we go down the road. So how to get the market back into the solution is very important in my mind.
We have time for one more question in the back, sir.
Yes, my name is Dave Palladino. I own Dino Storage and Landmark Group, and your brand building ideas sound really great for Fortune 500 companies. But how do you think your strategies relate to local entrepreneurs that have nowhere near $500 million in budgets to build a brand name? And what are the differences in what you're talking about and maybe would apply to a local entrepreneur's situation?
Well, I think all those principles really apply to local entrepreneurs. And if you really stop and think about it, a lot of businesses are built on intellectual integrity. It's all about figuring out what's possible, deploying the resources against it, the enthusiasm to incent your employees to do it, the action or the understanding that's the action and understanding to get it done. So when you're building a small business, it's very much like building a large business. And I learned my trade building some small businesses when I started out. And it's all about understanding consumers and customers, make sure you're giving them the benefits that they want. The equation is always the quality and benefits they want at a price that's reasonable. If you get the value and benefits out of whack with the price, you won't sell anything, they'll head for the exits. So I really think it is very similar, the principles are very similar. Understand the consumer, understand the customer, and make sure you're delivering good value in the form of benefits and price to those consumers.
In the back.
Mr. Kilts, thank you so much. I love your stories. I'm Ann York. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy here at Creighton. And my question for you, and I always ask our speakers in our entrepreneurship classes, it's wonderful to hear success stories. You've been so incredibly successful. But is there a story you could tell us about a time that you thought you failed at something and what you learned from it?
Well, actually, a lot of my success stories, I don't even like to think about the failure stories. To be a marketer, you have to be like a baseball player. You can't worry about the fact you struck out last week or yesterday or the time before. You got to go to the plate with a very positive attitude. But I will tell you that in Country Time Lemonade, I kind of alluded to it, that was, almost, everybody thought it wasn't going to work. Low concept score, low advertising score, yet it turned into a huge success. I will tell you I had the same experience with the turnaround at Lunchables. So those are just two of the ones I conveyed where everybody was very skeptical of whether we could do it or not. And that's why turnarounds are so satisfying, because you bring your knowledge, your experience, your organization, your people skills, and your resources, again, putting it all together and letting the consumer vote. So I've had a lot of sleepless nights, and probably the worst one I ever had was the one I described in the Turbo Champion. The company was at risk, and my solution, great marketer Jim Kilts' solution, was turn the gray handle into a red handle and market it. It worked.
You wonder how legends are born. Well, you've just heard the story. Well, we're at the end of our time, Jim, and you've been immensely gracious and generous, as I know you are, and I so appreciate, from the behalf of all of us here, for the lessons of it all and helping us know what really matters and how to do it. So we thank you for coming to this leadership conversation. Jim,
thank you. It's good to be here.
We certainly thank you for watching, and we hope that this program has been both stimulating and exciting, and maybe in its own way have a kind of serious mischief as you think about learning and growing and leading in a very complex business environment. We hope these leadership conversation programs are useful to you. We'd love to hear from you and love to hear your suggestions and counsel. So on to great leading and extraordinary living. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.